Hi, friends. I'm Sister Beth Murphy. I'm the Communications Director for the Dominican Sisters of Springfield. And today I'm here with my sister Mila Díaz Solano, who is on our leadership team. And the two of us are going to talk with Father Charlie Bouchard, our Dominican brother, about discerning the vote for the upcoming general election. So welcome, Father Charlie.
Thank you. Happy to be with you.
Good to have you here. Well, in addition to being a wonderful mentor and friend to me and to our congregation, Father Charlie is a Dominican priest of the St. Albert the Great province and Senior Director of Theology and Sponsorship for Catholic Health Association in the United States. And he also works with church leaders from the United States to the Vatican, talking to them about issues about healthcare, social justice, public policy, and the church. And Father Charlie's quite an expert as a theologian, ethicist, and a pastoral leader. So we thought that he was a pretty perfect person to talk to today about what it means to discern our vote during this difficult and challenging time in our nation's history. So thanks for joining us, Father Charlie. We appreciate having you here.
Sure.
And I'm going to let Sister Mila begin.
Well, Father Charlie, thank you for accepting to be with us. I will start with a question. Early in his papacy, Pope Francis said, sometimes we hear that a good Catholic is not interested in politics. This is not true. Good Catholics immerse themselves in politics by offering the best of themselves so that the leader can govern. The question we need to answer in response to Pope Francis' call to immerse ourselves in politics is how? How do we do that? What should matter to us when we prepare to vote? So I want to ask Father Charlie, what is foundational to your discernment of candidates for elected office? What resources and values do you use to frame a decision about voting in local, state, or federal elections?
Well, thanks for the question. I totally agree with Pope Francis that politics is an essential part of our Christian life. And the church, as you know, has been through every possible political structure, everything from communism to monarchy to socialism to the democratic republic like we have here in the United States. And we have very firm teaching about the values that should inform our political decisions, especially in our Catholic social teaching, and those are all outlined in the bishop's document, Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. The problem is that even though we have clear doctrinal teaching, applying those teachings in any particular time and place is difficult, and that's why the term discernment is really appropriate here. It's not just like a computer where you feed in the information and get the answers, because circumstances change from one place and time to another. So you have to look back at our basic teachings and say, okay, how do we best make these values real in this particular situation? It probably comes as a surprise to some people, especially given our situation in the United States today. But really, according to St. Thomas Aquinas and many others, the purpose of government and political life is the common good. That's why we have it. And the common good is mainly the art of living together. And so we bring our faith commitments to this, and we say, well, how should we live together from our Christian perspective? And we ask, what is really best for all of us together? And that doesn't mean that our own personal interests and opinions don't have a place here. They do. But when we get into political life, we've got to always ask, what is best for all of us? An example of this would be, we've got a lot of talk in political life today about the right to own guns or the right to free speech. Those are very important values rooted in the Constitution. But my own personal desire to own a gun, for example, cannot be the only thing that dictates my vote. I have to say, well, regarding weapons, what's the best policy for all of us together? And that's sometimes hard to do, to step outside of our own passionate interests and say what's good for us.
So it is about choosing the common good and living together. And I think, the three of us live in religious life, so we live a life of the common well-being. I guess my question for you is, sometimes our choice is more clear than others.
Right.
It's easy to make a decision about who we're going to vote for. But other times we're choosing between either two goods
Mm-hmm.
or two things that are not completely good,
Mm-hmm.
And so that takes more discernment when your choice is that clear. Do you have any kind of a process that you like to use when you're discerning your own vote, and what can you share about that with us?
Well, I think there are a couple things that I start with, at least. First of all, I think we always have to ask whether the candidate has the ability to pull us together. That's why even the major political parties avoid picking candidates from one extreme or the other, because they know that those people are going to have a limited ability to draw everyone together. I think the second thing, and it's hard to assess, but we need to look at the character of our candidates. Are they honest? Are they truthful? Do they have integrity? Do we see, a similarity or continuity between their personal and public lives? And I think we also need to pray as we discern about voting, so that we can keep our own personal needs and issues in perspective. As I said, they're not insignificant. As we know from community life, a lot of times we don't get everything we want because we sort of give it up for the sake of the good. But that can be real difficult. And I think we also need to remember that not everything can be solved or fixed by changes in civil law. There is a difference between morality and public policy. My own personal morality is very demanding. I want to be the best person I can possibly be in all ways. But when we're dealing with political situations and civil laws or public policy is geared toward toward public order and the common good. So it sometimes doesn't get 100%. And that doesn't mean that we simply give up. It just means that we may have to use other means to achieve the ends that we're interested in, rather than just saying, well, I'm going to vote for this candidate and that candidate will create laws that will fix everything. That's not true.
So there is something beyond the law, is what I hear you saying.
Right.
All right.
And that, I think today that becomes, as we all know, is very difficult, because one of the main issues, biggest issues for Catholics at least, is the whole question of the legality of abortion. And so we could either vote for a candidate who promises to make it illegal, either through a law or through a change on the Supreme Court. But all our indications are today that that's simply not going to happen, that there is not enough consensus about the moral status of the early embryo for us to change the law that way. So then Catholics are faced with a dilemma. What do? I believe this act is morally wrong, but we can't fix it through legal means. Then what do I do? And I think the answer to that is that we have to vote for the candidate who we think, all things considered, is the best for all of us, and then work on issues, specific issues like abortion, and try to persuade people of the truth of our value and of our belief. So as theologians would say, sometimes we have to kind of tolerate inadequacies in the law because we can't fix the law or it wouldn't be enforceable, and then work to persuade and to change people's minds.
Thank you. That's very, very clear. I think there's another question we wanted to ask.
Yes, Father Charlie. Voting is one way of exercising our rights as citizens. But what happens after you vote? we know that participatory democracy requires more than casting a ballot. As important as that is, what recommendations do you have for Catholics who want to fully engage their responsibilities as citizens? And why is that important for people of faith?
Yeah, I think when we as Christians, as Catholics, look at voting and at government, we have to remember that when we talk about the common good, we never fully achieve it here in this life. I mean, we're moving toward it, but it's always going to remain a promise. And ultimately, the promise of the common good is the reign of God. That's what we're trying to bring about. So we've got to realize that no candidate is perfect and no political system is perfect. And yet we strive for this incredible reality of the reign of God, or maybe the common good with a capital C and a capital G. And we have to continue to work toward that even after the election. You know, as I said earlier, laws can't fix everything. So we elect these representatives to try to realize the values that we hold dear, everything from the sanctity of unborn life to the sanctity of the lives of children and of poor people and of immigrants. That's all part of the deal. And we're not going to get 100% of that from any candidate. So we need to continue to stay involved and to stay informed after the election, to take some time to think about complex issues, like, for example, the question of tariffs, which have been in the news a lot. I'm not an economist. I don't really understand all of this stuff about tariffs. And yet, to be informed and to influence our lawmakers, I have to understand something about that. And the same could be said about every other issue. We have to make an attempt to understand what values those who differ with us hold, why those values are different, and is there anything that we hold in common? And then try to work toward that, especially by persuasion, as I stated earlier, and by writing to our representatives and our elected officials and letting them know why we think this is a good proposal or not.
Thank you, Father Charlie. And that requires also networking or organizing or being in touch as citizens, one with the others, so that we can do more as a collective, than just as one person.
That's exactly right. You know, the common good is not a spectator sport. We all have to be involved in working toward it, all in our different ways. And the church, I think, we often get reduced by society to a single issue, and I think you all know that's probably abortion. And yet the common good has to include far more than that. It's got to go further. And all of these values that we hold have to find a place in our political program.
You know, there's nothing like getting engaged with people who live in your own community and finding out what the issues are that are facing people in your own neighborhood and town, to help you begin to see the breadth of concerns that people have, and to grow in your ability to respond to basically the needs of your neighbor. Mm-hmm. You know, the disciple asked Jesus, well, who is my neighbor? And Jesus said, to whom will you be neighbor? Mm-hmm. And I think especially since the pandemic has hit, my interest in meeting the needs of the people who live right around me has grown in ways that I did not anticipate. And I've begun to see the people who live around me as people who need the care of my vote and discernment as I go forward. And that's something I did not expect to have happen to me. My vision has been pretty global for a long time, but now I see the mentally ill and the formerly incarcerated who are walking the streets in my neighborhood, and I have to say, what do they need immediately from me and from our government? So I think that we can sometimes think in these big terms, but we need to maybe look locally and at that global common good.
Yeah, that's a really important point. You know, there's that old saying that all politics is local. And I think what that refers to is the local realities that we see and feel every day. But it also means that people start first with their own self-interest. What do I need today? That's okay. But we need to look at that and say, okay, let's broaden your perspective a little. What do we need? And so I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Either Sister Mila or Father Charlie, can you think of anything else, any real practical advice that might be helpful to those who are going to listen to this or read the article in Just Words? Anything else that we need to think about?
I think there's, you know, I was trying to think, I preached last Sunday at a parish here, and I was trying to think, well, what does the world need from the Catholic Church today or from Christians? And I think one of the big things is the virtue of courage. You know, Jesus says many times in the Gospels, be not afraid. You know, that famous hymn, be not afraid. And we're in a time right now that is driven largely by fear. You know, fear of the COVID virus, fear of the economy, fear of the fires in California, fear of the election itself. And I think out of our Catholic tradition, I mean, we're a big population here in the US, that if we can help people be less fearful and to trust in the Spirit, if we're willing to open our hearts to that, I think that's something that can be a great gift that we give to society.
That's a perfect note to go out. Oh, Sister Mila, go ahead.
And I think we have a very good opportunity at this time of the pandemic in which we have the time to dialogue about what are the important issues for our country, what are the important needs or decisions that we have to make for the common good. So
right.
I think part of being not afraid is just engaging in dialogue and conversation and discussions without the fear that we will not agree in some things, but that's good. In discussing, we can find the truth, together.
Right. And I think, you know, that unity for us is largely found in our Catholic social teaching. And so as much as possible, we should try to keep our discussions in that context. Start with, what do we mean by the common good? What do we mean by human dignity? What do we mean by justice? What do we mean by, you know, all those principles? And then say, okay, let's look at this issue, which is very divisive, through the lens of these teachings, which are not optional for Catholics. I mean, we can live them out in different ways, but those basic principles are not optional.
I think that's some really good practical advice, and I thank you for that. And thank you for your contribution, Sister Mila, as well. I think what we'll do, where we post this video, we will also post access to some of those resources. So what are the principles of Catholic social teaching? We'll have something there to help our readers understand that. And also information about how you find out whether you're registered to vote, and how to go about fixing that if you're not, and maybe some practical reader's guides. And I believe we have some prayer resources for people who are getting ready to go cast their ballot, whether they're doing that from the kitchen table or at a public place. Yep. So all of those things I hope will be helpful to our friends as they approach this time, and will help people be not afraid as they move forward with their vote. So thank you so much, Father Charlie, for being with us.
You're very welcome. Pleasure to be with both of you.